The Mandalay Bay Events Center in Las Vegas, Nevada, on a Friday evening in March of 2003, held 4,211 people inside its main arena. The lights above the floor were industrial in white. The floor itself was a canvas octagon ringed in chain link, and the air smelled of tape and adrenaline, and the particular electricity that gathers in a room when trained men have been watching other trained men hurt each other for 2 hours. The event had run long. 3 preliminary bouts had gone to decision. The crowd was loud and restless and satisfied in the way that crowds become when they have been given exactly what they came for, and they were beginning to look for something more. The fighter's name was Marcus Drell. He was 29 years old. He stood 6 feet and 3 inches tall and weighed 244 pounds at the morning's official weigh-in, which placed him among the largest men competing in the heavyweight division at that time. His record was 11 wins and 1 loss, with 9 of those victories ending before the second round. He had knocked out a former collegiate wrestling champion in 41 seconds in his last fight. He had submitted a decorated kickboxer with a rear naked choke in the fight before that. He had been written about in 2 national sports publications in the 12 months prior, and both pieces had used the word dominant. His hands were wrapped in red. His corner team wore matching shirts. He had a manager who had booked him onto this card specifically because the event was being filmed for broadcast, and the manager understood that what Marcus Drell needed at this stage of his career was not another opponent but an audience. In the next 11 seconds, in front of 4,211 people and a broadcast camera positioned 7 rows back, something would happen that not one person in that building expected, including Marcus Drell. In 11 seconds, with no warning and no ceremony, one of the most composed men in the history of American combat sports would demonstrate in public, and without comment, what 35 years of disciplined work looks like when it is pressed against 30 seconds of arrogance. Nobody inside that arena knew, in the moment before it happened, what they were about to see. They would spend decades trying to explain it to people who had not been there. Drell had won his main card bout by technical knockout in the second round. He was still moving with the energy of a man who has recently done violence and found it satisfactory. He was at the event's post-fight media table when the moderator opened the floor for questions from the press and from the industry guests seated in the first 3 rows. The moderator was a former boxing commentator named Paul Whitfield who had been hosting this format for 6 years. Whitfield later told the journalists that he had seen fighters use the open floor segment to call out opponents, to make speeches, to cry. He said he had never seen one do what Marcus Drell did that evening. Drell leaned forward over the microphone. He said he wanted to address someone in the room. He said he had heard that Chuck Norris was sitting somewhere in the building, and he said he wanted Chuck Norris to know, in front of everyone present, that the era of karate men being taken seriously in a combat context was over. He said the word karate with a particular flatness, the way a man says a word he considers already defeated. He said that what men like Chuck Norris had built their reputations on was choreography, not fighting, and that any one of the current generation of mixed martial artists could demonstrate that difference in under a minute. He said he would be willing to do so himself. He said it slowly. He was smiling when he said it. Paul Whitfield later remembered the exact quality of the silence that followed. He said it was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of 4,000 people doing the same calculation simultaneously and arriving at the same uncertain answer. Because everyone in the building old enough to know the name understood its weight. Chuck Norris had been a 6-time undefeated world karate champion. He had trained under Bruce Lee. He had sparred with Joe Louis and Bill Wallace, men whose names were spoken in martial arts circles the way physicists speak of certain foundational equations. He had spent 30 years in the sport before transitioning to film, and the transition had never required him to pretend the sport was less than it was. He had simply done both things, and done them with the same economy of motion. He was sitting in the 5th row. He had arrived an hour before the event began, without announcement in a gray zip jacket and dark trousers, and he had taken his seat with 2 people beside him who appeared to be personal guests. He was 52 years old at the time. He had a trimmed beard going to gray at the edges. He had the posture of a man who had spent so many decades making his body perform difficult things that stillness had become a discipline equal to movement. When Marcus Drell finished speaking, Chuck Norris did not respond immediately. He sat with his forearms on his knees and his hands loosely joined, and he looked at the microphone table with an expression that several witnesses would later describe, independently and without coordination, as not angry. One of those witnesses was a judo black belt and tournament official named Gerald Foss, who was seated 6 seats to Chuck Norris's left in the same row. Foss said he watched Norris's face for approximately 8 seconds and saw nothing in it that resembled agitation. He said what he saw was something he could only describe as professional assessment. Paul Whitfield said later that he began to speak into his microphone to redirect the session, and that Chuck Norris was already standing before the first word left his mouth.
If you have been watching this channel for any length of time, you know what is coming next. You know the particular geometry of what happens when a man who has done something for 35 years encounters a man who has spoken about it for 30 seconds. You know it because you have learned to read the posture, the pace.
The particular economy with which a trained man moves when he has already decided what the next 4 minutes will contain. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because what happened in that arena over the next 11 seconds, and what it meant for the next 2 decades, is exactly what this series was built to document. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from tonight. Chuck Norris stood. He did not stand quickly. He stood the way men stand when they have been seated at long tables and they intend to walk somewhere specific, with no indication of urgency and no performance in the rising. He reached to the arm of his seat, lifted his gray zip jacket, which he had placed there when he sat down, folded it once along the seam and set it on the seat behind him. He moved toward the aisle at the pace of a man who is crossing a parking lot in good weather. He did not look at Marcus Drell while he was walking. He looked at the floor in front of him with the mild attention of a man navigating an unfamiliar room. The crowd had not yet understood what was happening. Gerald Foss said he heard the person next to him say in a low voice, "Is that who I think it is?" He said he did not answer because he was watching too carefully to speak. He has already lost. He just does not know it yet. Drell watched Chuck Norris walk toward the media table with an expression that at least 3 people in attendance later characterized as confusion. The confusion was understandable. The man approaching him did not match the architecture of a threat. He was 23 years older. He was 4 inches shorter. He was wearing street clothes. His hands were not raised and his jaw was not set, and his eyes were not doing what the eyes of men who want to fight typically do. He looked. Several witnesses agreed, like a contractor who has arrived to look at the problem before quoting the work. Chuck Norris stopped at the edge of the media table. He looked at Marcus Drell from a distance of approximately 8 feet. He said, in a voice that people in the first 4 rows could hear without effort, and the rest of the arena could not hear at all, "Let us find out." That was the full sentence. 2 words and a contraction. No elaboration. The moderator, Paul Whitfield, said later that in 20 years of managing public events involving fighters he had never heard a quieter answer to a louder question. Drell stood up from behind the table. This was the moment, Whitfield said, when the building changed, because when Drell stood up he was visibly large. The camera footage, reviewed by several combat sports journalists in the weeks that followed, shows the size differential with an accuracy that witnesses said felt even more pronounced in person. Drell was taller and significantly heavier and 18 years younger, and he had recently, within the hour, knocked another professional fighter unconscious. He came around the end of the media table and he squared his stance and he raised his hands. Chuck Norris had not moved from the spot where he stopped. A fight is not one man hitting another man. A fight begins several seconds before any contact occurs. In the space between 2 bodies, in the calculations that both men are making about angle and timing and what the other person's weight is doing when it shifts. The science of that space has a name in serious martial arts instruction, and the name is distance control. The man who controls the distance controls the fight, not because he prevents contact but because he selects which contact occurs and when. Chuck Norris had been teaching this principle for more than 2 decades before this evening. He had written about it. He had demonstrated it in filmed instructional material. He understood the distance between two bodies the way a surgeon understands the space between instruments, as a medium with specific properties, navigable to those who have learned its language. Drell moved first. He moved with the controlled aggression of a trained heavyweight, not charging, but advancing. Covering distance in 3 steps with his hands guarding his center line and his chin tucked. This was correct form. His training was real and it was evident. Gerald Foss said later that if Drell had walked toward anyone else in that building that evening, the result would have been determined by Drell. Second 1. Chuck Norris did not retreat. He moved laterally, a single step to his right, a movement so economical that 2 witnesses in the 3rd row said afterward they nearly missed it. The step altered the geometry of Drell's advance without opposing it. Drell's forward momentum carried him past the position where Norris had been standing. The adjustment required by a man who has committed to a forward line and finds the target is no longer on that line is a fraction of a second of recalibration. That fraction is a long time. Second 2. Drell recalibrated. He turned. He threw his left hand, a jab with the full mechanical integrity of a man who throws it in training every day, extended and snapping, aimed at the place where Chuck Norris's head had been, and then adjusted in flight toward where it was. Norris moved his head 3 inches to his left. The fist passed his right ear. The sound it made was the sound of fast air. 3 people in the front row saw this and said nothing. Paul Whitfield said later that he had set his microphone on the table and he could not remember doing it. Second 3. Drell's right hand followed immediately. It was a cross, thrown with proper weight transfer, his back shoulder rolling forward, his hips driving the movement the way they are supposed to drive it. It was the punch that had ended the collegiate wrestlers' evening 41 seconds into their contest. It traveled toward Chuck Norris's chin on a line that was technically precise and it did not arrive. Norris deflected it with his left forearm, a motion so compact it registered on the camera footage as barely a gesture, and the deflection redirected the punch 2 inches wide. The contact between Norris's forearm and Drell's wrist was audible in the first 3 rows. Gerald Foss described the sound as similar to a staple gun. Second 4. Drell threw a low kick with his right leg, a technique that had been effective against several of his previous opponents because of the reach his height gave him, and the power his weight produced. The kick left the floor and traveled toward the outside of Chuck Norris's left knee. Norris lifted his left knee 6 inches and let the kick pass beneath it. The kick met nothing. Drell's leg landed and he reset his stance, and his face, for the first time since rising from the media table, showed something other than controlled aggression. Gerald Foss said that what he saw on Drell's face in that moment was a specific kind of surprise. Not the surprise of a man who has been hurt. The surprise of a man who has thrown 4 things at a target, and the target has been in a slightly different position each time, and he cannot determine why. Second 5. Drell feinted with his left and committed his body to a takedown, lowering his level and driving forward with his hips. It was a legitimate wrestling technique, the kind executed with practiced footwork and proper body mechanics. And against the majority of opponents it would have been successful. Chuck Norris caught Drell's left wrist with his right hand as Drell came forward. The grip stopped nothing but it redirected the drive, turning Drell's body 10 degrees to the right as his momentum continued, and Chuck Norris stepped aside for the second time in 5 seconds, moving with Drell's energy rather than against it. And Drell found himself facing a direction he had not intended to face. He was slightly off balance. The camera captures it. His weight was distributed incorrectly for a man in that stance with that facing, and he needed 1 step to correct it, and he did not take that step. Second 6. Chuck Norris was behind him. Not far behind him. Close enough that the distance was no longer a factor and no longer Drell's to manage. Norris's right hand came forward at a trajectory aimed at the base of Drell's skull, and it stopped. It stopped at a measured distance from contact that 3 combat sports journalists who reviewed the footage later estimated at between 3/4 of an inch and 1 inch. The hand was open. The fingers were extended. It was not a fist. It was a hand held 1 inch from the back of a 244-pound heavyweight fighter who had not seen it coming, and it was held there, still and open, while Marcus Drell's balance finished correcting itself and Drell became aware that the fight had been decided and that he had not participated in the decision. Second 7. Chuck Norris lowered his hand. He took 1 step back, and then a second step, and he was standing at the same distance from Drell that he had occupied at the beginning of the sequence, 8 feet, and his breathing was unchanged and his expression was unchanged and his hands were at his sides. Gerald Foss said the silence that followed lasted between 3 and 4 seconds. He said it was a different silence than the one that had followed Drell's speech. He said that silence had been the silence of a room waiting. This silence was the silence of a room that had already received its answer and had not yet found the language to discuss it. Drell stood with his hands still partially raised for 2 seconds. Then he lowered them. He turned to face Chuck Norris across 8 feet of arena floor. His expression had reorganized itself into something that was not quite what it had been before. Chuck Norris walked toward him. He stopped within arm's reach. He said something in a voice that no microphone in the building captured. He said it without gesture, and without theater, and without raising or lowering his eyes from Drell's face. He said 1 sentence. Then he extended his right hand, palm up, between them. What that sentence was has been reported differently by the people who claim to have been close enough to hear it. Paul Whitfield, who was the closest, said he heard 4 words, and that 2 of them were the word "your." Gerald Foss said he heard 6 words, and that they constituted what he described as the most accurate piece of instruction he had ever witnessed, delivered in under 10 seconds. A camera operator who was positioned 8 feet to the left said he believed he heard the phrase "the door is still open," though he acknowledged the ambient noise in the building made certainty impossible. What no one disputes is what Marcus Drell did next. He looked at the extended hand for a period that several witnesses measured at between 4 and 6 seconds. Then he took it. He did not make a speech. He did not gesture to the crowd. He shook the hand once, with both men's arms fully extended, and then he turned and walked back toward the media table and sat down and did not speak again for the remainder of the session. Paul Whitfield recovered the microphone. He said later that he considered saying something about what had just happened, and then decided that anything he said would make it smaller. He moved to the next question. By the time the event had fully cleared, the story had begun its transit. It moved first along the row, among the people who had been closest. Gerald Foss told the man beside him. That man told the event promoter, who had been standing against the far wall and had seen most of it from a distance of 40 feet. The camera operator told the production coordinator. A journalist from a combat sports website who had been seated in the second row filed a short piece that evening from his phone, from the parking structure before he reached his car. The piece was 11 sentences long. It used the phrase "controlled demolition" to describe what he had witnessed. It was shared 700 times before midnight. The story moved the way these stories move, which is to say imperfectly and with enthusiasm. By the following week, 3 different versions were circulating in martial arts forums online, differing primarily in the duration of the exchange, the precise technique Norris had used or not used, and the nature of Drell's response afterward. One version had the exchange lasting 30 seconds. One had it lasting 2. One included a version of the private sentence that bore no resemblance to any account given by witnesses who had been present. This is what oral history does to a real event. It does not distort the center of the story. It distorts the perimeter, the numbers and the words and the gestures at the edges, while the core fact remains intact and replicates unchanged through every version. The core fact here was simple and consistent across all accounts. A younger and larger man had spent 6 seconds attempting to land a technique on Chuck Norris and had not succeeded. And Chuck Norris had chosen not to answer violence with violence, and had made that choice at a distance of less than 1 inch. Gerald Foss went home to Portland that weekend and taught a class on Monday morning. He told his students what he had seen. He said he spent 45 minutes trying to explain the lateral step in second one, the specific geometry of it, the way it addressed the problem of forward momentum without requiring a retreat. He said his students understood the mechanics, but that the part they could not fully absorb in a single session was the part about the lack of anger. He said that what distinguished what he had witnessed from every other confrontation he had seen or studied was the absence of any emotional participation on the part of the man who won it. He said it was as if Norris had been managing traffic rather than fighting, orderly, attentive, and fundamentally untroubled. Marcus Drell fought twice more in the following 18 months. His record remained competitive. He never publicly addressed the events of that Friday evening in direct terms. In a magazine interview conducted approximately 2 years later, a reporter asked him a question that appeared designed to elicit a comment about the incident, and Drell said only that he had a great deal of respect for first-generation American martial artists and left the sentence there. The journalist noted that Drell did not smile when he said it, but that he did not appear uncomfortable either. He appeared, the journalist wrote, to have already decided exactly how much of the answer he intended to give. Chuck Norris did not speak publicly about the incident. He did not give an interview about it or reference it in any documented appearance in the 2 years following the event. This was consistent with what people who had trained with him or worked alongside him over the previous 3 decades described as his standard practice. He did not discuss his confrontations. He did not seek recognition for them. Several people who had witnessed encounters of similar character over the years described finding this restraint more striking than the encounters themselves. A martial arts instructor named Ray DeLuca, who had trained at the same school as Norris in the early 1970s and had stayed in contact with him across the decades, was asked about the Mandalay Bay incident in an interview several years later. DeLuca said he had heard about it within a week of the event. He said his reaction was not surprise but something closer to familiarity. He said that what the younger generation of combat sports practitioners sometimes misunderstood about men who had come up through the traditional disciplines was the relationship between skill and demonstration. He said that for the generation that had built American competitive karate in the 1960s and 1970s, the skill was never for showing. The skill was for keeping. The demonstration was what happened when you had no remaining alternative, and the measure of the demonstration was how little of the skill it required you to use. He said Chuck Norris had used very little. The camera footage of the exchange circulated in digital form for years on platforms and forums, and in training videos. It was used as instructional material in at least 3 documented cases by coaches teaching footwork and distance management to students. One of those coaches was a former Olympic wrestler who had been in the building that night and who said he showed the footage to every new student he took on as a demonstration of what he called the fundamental principle, by which he meant the principle that the man who does not need to move far moves exactly as far as required and no further. There is a thing that happens when a man has prepared for long enough. The preparation stops being a collection of techniques and becomes a quality of attention. It becomes the ability to be exactly where the situation requires without deciding to go there, because the decision has been made so many times over so many years that it no longer requires consultation. Marcus Drell was a talented fighter who had prepared himself honestly and well. Chuck Norris was a man for whom preparation had become the baseline condition of his presence in any room. The difference between those 2 states cannot be manufactured on demand or borrowed or acquired in a compressed timeline. It is the accumulated product of decades of daily practice, and on that Friday evening in Las Vegas, it was the only relevant measurement. The sentence Chuck Norris spoke to Marcus Drell across 8 feet of arena floor before the exchange began was 2 words and a contraction. Witnesses who spent time afterward trying to recall their immediate response to it said it had not sounded like a challenge when they heard it. It had sounded like a door being opened. Whether that door was an invitation or a warning was a question that Drell answered for himself over the following 6 seconds, and the answer he arrived at was the one the rest of the building arrived at along with him, which was that there was no meaningful difference between the two. The things a man believes he can do under pressure, and the things he actually does when the pressure arrives are separated by the length of time he has spent in genuinely pressured conditions. This is not a criticism of Marcus Drell. He was 29 years old and he was good at what he did, and he said what he believed. The distance between what he believed and what he discovered over those 11 seconds was the distance between 30 years and none. It was not a moral failure, it was an arithmetic one. Next week on this channel, the afternoon in 1979 when Chuck Norris walked into a film studio in Burbank, and a stuntman with an undefeated amateur boxing record decided to settle, in front of the entire crew, a question that had been circulating on that lot for 3 weeks. The crew stopped working, the director did not call cut because there was nothing to cut. What happened next was over in 7 seconds, and the stuntman told the story for the rest of his life. Not because it shamed him, but because it was the most instructive 7 seconds he ever spent.